Hello, podcast family. Melissa and I are so glad you come back every week. I think today's episode is one you're going to want to share with friends. And if you've got time, we would welcome a review of this show on your favorite podcasting app. Today, Sharon McMahon is our guest. Many of you know her from her wildly popular Instagram account called Sharon Says So. I think she's got like 1.3 million followers now. She talks about government. She talks about politics. She's an educator, but she's also a warm, generous, sincere person with a prodigious intellect. All of that is on display today. She answers my questions, some of Melissa's, and some of yours, which you shared with me over on my Instagram account. Sharon is also the #1 New York Times bestselling author of The Small and the Mighty, 12 Unsung Americans Who Changed the Course of History from the Founding to the Civil Rights Movement. By the way, this book is a fabulous choice for teens. I highly recommend reading it for yourself, but maybe with some of your high schoolers to give them another window into American history. Now, I will warn you, by the end of this episode, Melissa and I were both in tears. The good kind, the kind that leave you with hope and some optimism. So if you need a dose of either of those, listen all the way to the end. All right, without further ado, let's enter this conversation with Sharon McMahon. Sharon McMahon, we love it when you come to our podcast. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's great.
Welcome.
Yeah, so fun. So let's just start with you. How is it going with your book? It's been quite a while since you launched it. It feels like everyone I know has read it. What does it feel like to be a New York Times #1 bestselling author with a book that just keeps selling?
Oh, that's so kind of you. You're obviously running in the right circles, Julie, if everyone you know has read it.
That's exactly right.
You obviously have good friends. It's so, of course, having a book that does well is the dream of every writer. Every writer, of course, wants to see their work in the hands of as many people as possible.
Totally.
That's always a thing that you would wish for and hope for after all of these years of working on a project, right? But it is, I think, one of the things that I've been most surprised about is just having that sort of title behind my name makes me infinitely more credible to some people, especially other writers who know the gravity of that sort of, accomplishment. People who may have been like, I don't know who that is, now still think, I don't know who that is, but she must be somebody. Do you know what I'm saying?
I totally do. I heard this interview actually with Adam Scott after the finale of Severance, and they were asking him about his career. And he said, in the early days, I was just auditioning, not getting a lot of parts. But every part I got, my family and friends would be like, Adam, you're doing so great. And he thought he had traction. He goes, then when I had traction, I was like, oh, that's the thing I didn't know I didn't have. And I'm imagining that must be how you feel.
Yeah. They're like, oh no, I'm on Severance.
Yeah.
Exactly. Even if you've never watched it, you're like, oh, Severance. You've heard people talking about it.
That's it.
Yes. So yeah, it's a level of objective success that is, it's something you can't achieve without some sort of external validation.
Yes.
That's part of what it is. It's the external third-party validation that makes you seem credible.
It's funny because I was talking about this today on Instagram with a small group that I have. And I was saying, for some reason, authors are not supposed to want to be successful in the same way that an actor wants an Oscar. Like you're supposed to sort of be sitting by the side and being like, oh, I'm shocked. My book did well, when really you said what I said. You write to be read and you want to be read by as many people as possible because that's why you write. Isn't that true, Melissa?
Oh, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And then every person who reads it brings you to a new audience. You know,
Yes.
it expands the possibility of more readers.
Yes.
And right, if I just wanted to write for myself, well, that's what a journal is for.
Yeah.
Right. Like I could just there are easier hobbies that take a lot less time.
I mean, that's 100% true. I was going to ask you, what was the longest piece of writing you did before this book?
Oh my gosh, probably some college paper.
Yeah.
Right?
So
some 20-page college paper.
So 60 or 80,000 words, that's a big deal. Do you know how many words you wrote? This is a writing podcast, so we're going to talk a little bit about writing, obviously. But do you know how many words you wrote and then how much you had to whittle it down? I wondered if you kept track of that.
Yeah, I think the book ended up at somewhere around 85,000, 90,000 words, which is not particularly long in the historic nonfiction space.
True.
You know, it's certainly not an Alexander Hamilton by Ron Chernow, right? And I intentionally wanted to keep the word count accessible.
Yes.
People buy big books really only, by and large, aspirationally. They want to be the kind of person who reads the big books, but they don't actually read them very often.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
You want to be the kind of person who reads Ulysses.
Yeah.
but you buy it. But in order for a book to be read by as many people as possible, people actually have to read the book.
I agree.
As opposed to just owning it.
Yep.
So I wanted to write a book that people would actually read and not just aspirationally own.
I love that so much. I tell people all the time, I just want you to finish my book. That is like my only goal. If you buy it, please at least get to the climax where I'm making my final case, because you put in so much energy, like layering it and getting it to this moment. And you want people to have that same sort of exhale that you had at the end. Did you establish a writing routine? Did you have research help? How did your writing process look for this book?
I started writing a completely different book than I ended up publishing.
That's incredible.
When my publisher approached me, I had initially thought of a different concept and they were like, we love that. That sounds great. And so I set off writing and I wrote about, 5, 6, 7 chapters, sent those off to my editor. And she kept saying, I really like this. I really like this. I really like this. But what if we did more of X, Y, and Z? And ultimately, I just could not get past sort of a certain point in writing this book. And ultimately, it came to me that maybe it's because you're writing the wrong thing.
Wow.
And I basically scrapped 80+% of what I had already written and started.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my gosh.
So I left a lot on the cutting room floor. In fact, earlier today, I was revisiting something that I wrote in an early draft to be like, what actually did I have to say about that person like 3 years ago? I'm curious. What did 3 years ago Sharon have to say about that? So then I wrote, I'm like, I'm going to write one sample chapter and I'm going to send it back to her and see, like, do you like this? Is this something? And she wrote back and was like, I love it. And I was like, okay, great. Then I love it. And we're doing that instead of all of these other things that I had planned on doing. And it ultimately took like a big amount of trust and vision on the part of my editor to be willing to just go along for the ride. A lot of authors have their contracts canceled if it's not something that, if they can't deliver on their original concept.
Yep.
I have a friend, I think Julie and I were talking about this.
I was going to ask you about her actually, but go ahead. Yeah.
Whose book was canceled after she had basically finished the manuscript, in part because the editor was just sort of not vibing with it or moving on or something along those lines. I saw another person this weekend, and I don't know her personally, but I read her story and watched her videos, that she had written her whole book and ultimately her editor left her imprint. And they didn't have a new editor for the project, and it kind of orphaned her book at the publisher. So all that to say, This is why nobody writes books, because they can't think of other hobbies.
I mean, honestly, it's
Right.
so accurate. And I love that you shared sort of the complexity of all that, because I think there's this illusion that the idea comes to you and then it pours out of you and then everybody helps you sell it, when really it is such a deep experience. I know that you wrote about all these unique people. And of course, I've read your book a couple of times now and spoken about it. How did you select those people? I'm noticing that each one was sort of an unsung person, and you're really good at championing people who've been overlooked. Talk a little bit about that. I think that has to do with your personality as much as it does anything. So tell me about that process. I think our audience would love to hear it.
Yeah, well, this relates to the thing you were just asking too about the research process.
Yes.
Which is, there's a reason these people don't get written about very often. It's not that nobody is ever interested in their story. It's that they are incredibly difficult to research, and they are incredibly difficult to come up with enough information about to write a whole book. So, for example, there's a person in my book named Anna Jeans whose story I kept coming back to, because she's related to several other people in the book, and many of the stories actually are related to each other. When you sort of finish the book, you can see a common thread between many of them. But nobody's ever written a book about her because she never married. She never had children. She intentionally obscured her contributions to history because of her religious beliefs. She was a Quaker who believed in the teachings in the book of Matthew that talk about, store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, and do not seek attention for your good works on earth. And it went along with her idea that, live simply, wear cotton clothes, don't get your picture taken, don't draw attention to yourself. So those are all things that she really believed in. So she would never have been like, and then, boys and girls, when I was 74 years old, I did the following amazing things. That was not her jam. And yet she had her quiet life left really mighty echoes behind, in that she had a massive impact on history just by virtue of being who she was. And she never lived to see it. She never lived to see the impact that she had. So people like her have remarkable stories, but are incredibly difficult to research. So this is one of the reasons I chose to weave all of these stories together, to give people a bigger, broader picture of the people who have changed the course of American history, how they all relate to each other, but who maybe there is not enough of a historic record to support an entire 300-page book. Because there just isn't. There isn't enough information to support a 300-page book on this one woman, even though I would have liked to have talked about her more. She's also an example of somebody who I have a strong hypothesis about that I was never able to satisfactorily prove. One of the challenges of writing nonfiction is that it has to be true. That you can't just make it up. The facts don't always line up the way you want them to.
Yes.
You just be like, plot twist. What would make a great story is X. And that's one of the infuriating things about writing nonfiction is that you can't just throw in a really cool plot twist. So my hypothesis about her is something I actually spent years researching, and consulted many other historians of the time period, of the place that she was from, consulted research librarians, beseeching them to will you please dig in your collections? Because this was during COVID. Dig through your collections and see if you can find anything had written. A lot of the collections were closed to the public, and the National Archives closed to the public for a long time, et cetera.
Right.
So,
wow.
My hypothesis, I was unable to prove. I can talk about it if you want me to, but
sure, yeah.
Well, the what I still believe is true about Anna Janes and her family, which you won't find in the book. Here's like the insider tea that I didn't include. My hypothesis is that she and her family were involved in the Underground Railroad.
Oh, wow.
And yes. And that there's almost no way that it can't be true in my mind. They lived in the right place, Philadelphia. They lived at the right time, the earlier part of the 19th century. I can put her brother, she's the youngest child, and always lived with her older siblings. Only one of her older siblings married, and none of them ever had children, or one had a child and that child died in infancy. So she lives with her siblings, her 5 siblings. I can put her older siblings in the room with prominent abolitionists like William Still, who is like one of the primary writers about the primary historians of the Underground Railroad. Like he is the person in Philadelphia who is writing down the stories of the escaped enslaved people who are making it to freedom. So I know they contributed to abolitionist causes because multiple brothers and Anna, there are reports of them attending abolitionist meetings. It aligned with their religious beliefs. Again, they were Quaker, and that was a strong, Quakers were often sort of out front in the abolitionist movement among white Americans. And so there are a variety of other reasons too, that just for the sake of time, I won't tell you every single piece of evidence that I came up with. But the bottom line is because none of these family members married and had children, and they were Quaker and intentionally either did not keep records or destroyed the records they had, there was, and again, the nature of the Underground Railroad is such that most people are not like, and then Bob arrived and his previous address was X, Y, and Z. They intentionally tried to keep that information secret because of the Fugitive Slave Act, that people could enter free states and return the escaped enslaved to their owners in southern states. So all that to say, I never found the one single piece of paper that talked about the people that stayed at their house, or the money they contributed, or the resources that they provided, even though I spent years looking. So ultimately, Anna's contribution in the book is not related to the Underground Railroad. She does something else that is, I think, remarkable, but it's a great example of how not everything turns out the way you think it's going to especially when you're writing nonfiction.
Yep.
And sometimes you can't even make something true that you really, really, really want to be true.
Unless you write historical fiction.
That's right.
The story you're telling makes me think, what a great subject. Like that would be an amazing project for you to get to tell the story as Gail Godwin uses this phrase that I love of respectful imagination, which is the work of the historical fiction writer, which is mostly what I write. So I'm completely captivated by your story and the whole process. And as you're unspooling it, and like you're right, like you can't write, nonfiction requires authenticity, right?
Yeah.
And we strive for total authenticity in historical fiction, but you can create the plot twist. And then you just write a good author's note at the end. It says, this is what we know and this is what we didn't know. So
part of what you said that I sort of want to call out, I often say that the way that you find your own bias is to ask yourself, what do I hope will be true? And that's a little bit what you're pointing to, right? Like when we're reading and we're seeking for bias confirmation, we're looking for what we hope will be true. And so that's a shortcut to help you recognize your own propensity. And I found that when I was writing my various books, I'm not researching history, but I'm researching research, right? So I go in with a perspective about video games or something, and then the research doesn't confirm my hunch. And you have to be willing to pivot. And I think that's one of the things about being a writer, is that you have to go where the facts take you. And that really underscores your whole mission. Tell me a little bit about being a sort of the subject of scrutiny around how you present facts. I notice because I am around a lot of your fans, people will say things like, Sharon has changed. And I'm like, I really don't think she has. So give me your take on that, because my guess is your direct messages tell you that. You don't need me to tell you that someone thinks you're changing, right?
Well, what's changed is the political administration. That's what's changed, right? So I even made a point recently that I have made many times over the years. And then when I brought up this point about something related to the rule of law, related to principles of democracy. And in the current political administration, people interpret what I am saying as an attack on the current situation. And then I brought up a post that I wrote in 2022 that said exactly the same thing that I am saying today, like verbatim. And I brought up, I wrote this in 2022. Who was president then? Pardon? Like I was saying the same thing almost 3 years ago. So what's changed is your perspective.
Exactly.
I still have the same perspective on due process and the rule of law that I had in 2022 when I wrote this. So it's a great example, though, Julie, of your own, of being willing to interrogate your own bias.
Exactly.
What I want to be true is X. I'll give you one other example. I subscribe to a newsletter. And today or yesterday, one of the newsletter topics was where they had polled 7 different prominent legal scholars.
Okay.
And they had asked, I won't even get into the actual politics of it, but they had asked 7 different legal scholars to weigh in on a specific legal issue that is facing the United States. And they intentionally chose legal scholars from across the political spectrum. And they gave the credentials of each of the legal scholars. Some came from like libertarian Cato Institute. Some people are from, Harvard and everywhere in between, right? Every single legal scholar arrived at a very similar conclusion.
It's beautiful.
On this weighty legal issue. They arrived at a very similar conclusion. And some pulled out different details from the story, but they had this kind of consensus. When I read the comments on this article that was written about, this question that was posed and then the 7 different legal scholars' responses, so many of the comments that were posted was, how dare you run a hit piece like this? How dare, and again, it's not my newsletter, but how dare you run a one-sided article like this one?
Wow.
When they had intentionally chosen people from a wide variety of different backgrounds, I would imagine they were hoping to get a variety of perspectives and being like some people saying yes to this and no to that. But in reality, they had all arrived at the same conclusion. And if they're being fair and honest, they run the story the way that they had framed it up, right? But the overwhelming response in the comments was, it's not what I hope to be true.
Exactly.
And so that feels very uncomfortable for me. And the problem is not me and my thinking. The problem is you.
That's it.
You did not tell me what I wanted to hear, and thus you are the problem.
That is the perfect frame up for my question about how we can create a variety of viewpoints to consider. Because I look back even 10 years ago, and I was so much more able to find a variety of viewpoints. I have been siloed against my will by the algorithms, by the places that I participate. And when I peek out from behind those places and I deliberately seek out other viewpoints, sometimes I land in this weird world where the credibility of the writer is low or the speaker is dramatic. How do you make sure that you're curating a wide variety of perspectives, and how do you trust them? I know for me, I typically end up in the land of traditional journalism, but I don't even know if that is the best anymore. So I'm curious about your opinion and how you can guide us on that.
Yeah, I think it's a really legitimate and great question that so many people have right now. Like, who am I supposed to believe?
Yeah.
I don't know if I can believe any of these people. So, for the first part, I do think there has been a dramatic drop in the trust of institutions, whether or not it is warranted or not. And I can
True.
understand how some people's perspective is, well, they got it wrong on X, Y, or Z thing in the past, so why should I trust them on A, B, and C now? I can very much understand that perspective. Well, XYZ institution was wrong about this, so instead, I believe Mary about everything that Mary says, right? Like, as though Mary is not prone to the same logical fallacies. I'm making up Mary.
No, right.
Prone to the same logical fallacies that a single individual can't be corrupted in a perhaps an even more egregious way than a large institution can. As
Totally.
though Mary's need to make money off of ad sales for Mary's podcast is not dictating her content, as though Mary, again, fictitious Mary, is immune from the same market forces that the larger institution has. The larger institution actually can much better weather the market storm than a single individual can.
Totally.
So it's a legitimate quandary, Julie. Like where am I if I can't trust the institutions and I can't trust Mary? Well, what am I supposed to do? So I have been really liking this website called Ground News. Have you?
Oh yeah,
Ground News?
I saw that you have that on your Substack as one of your sponsors. Yeah,
Yes.
tell me more about that.
It's ground.news. This is not paid. I'm just bringing this up organically.
Yes.
One of the things that I like about it is that it shows you when a story is being covered almost exclusively by one side or the other. It has like a section called blind spots, where it's like, if you are only reading certain news sources, you might not know about this thing that is happening because you're only reading right-leaning media or you're only reading left-leaning media. And then it also, when you click on a story, say the Israel-Gaza conflict, it'll show you what are the stories. You can just literally click from the left and from the right, and it shows you different iterations on the same topic. So you don't have to go read. You don't have to go to 20 websites searching Israel-Gaza conflict. Like it's aggregating it all on one website.
Wow, that's awesome. Boy.
So that has been very interesting for me to explore, even as somebody who has a very wide-ranging news diet. We all have very limited amount of time and bandwidth.
Right.
I do this as a job. Most people can't read 20 news sources a day or even 5 news sources a day
on the same topic.
Right. Exactly.
Like you got the news. Now I have to read it 5 more times. I mean, that's part of the trick, right?
Exactly. I'm going to read 5 different stories about the Federal Reserve. Like that's too many. Right. I didn't want to read any stories about the Federal Reserve.
Oh my gosh.
This website, again, I have more recently started exploring it. I found it to be like a really great time saver.
That's awesome.
And also I've discovered stories that I probably had never dug in the depths of the websites enough to pick up. You know what I mean?
Yes, I do. Now, if you are thinking about guiding a parent who's homeschooling, has kids, by the way, you were homeschooled for a little while. Is that right? And I never asked you about that on my last podcast and got in so much trouble. So if you want to give 2 sentences about
Mary
that,
wrote a whole post about you, Julie.
But I'm curious, like, what would you say to a parent about all of this? How do we prevent this indoctrinating of our own perspective? I found that really tricky with my kids. Like, I didn't want to unduly influence them, but of course I have a perspective and I have a vision of what I think is true or makes sense in the world. Even if I'm aware of my bias, I still like my bias better than their bias.
Of course.
So, yes. So what do you say about distilling all this information, raising kids, creating some kind of a Neutral is the wrong word. I guess I would say fair, or at least not so ideologically driven. What would you
Yeah.
say to a parent?
Yeah, I understand a parent's, especially a home educating parents' desire to instill their values into their children, and that's one reason of many that parents might choose to teach their children at home. That I want them to grow up with my values, whatever those might
Right.
be. So I really do understand it. One of the things I would say is that in order to become a critical thinker, and you and I have talked about this, Julie, in order to become a critical critical thinker, which I do think all parents would say, I
That
want
they
my
are.
children to be a critical thinker.
Yes.
In order to become a critical thinker, children must be presented with information to evaluate critically.
Love
And
that.
and that means sometimes being presented with information that you disagree with and that the child might disagree with, and being asked to critically evaluate it. People think critical evaluation is being critical of something like you're ugly, you're overweight, your hair is terrible today. That's not what we're talking about.
No.
We're talking about an analysis using an eye that or a brain that is analyzing something on the strengths of its arguments. Only learning information that you agree with is part of indoctrination.
Thank you.
If you want to be a critical thinker, you must be willing to interrogate your own beliefs and be presented with information you disagree with to critically evaluate. That's how you become a critical thinker.
That's right. And you need time to actually sit with it, not just look at it and dismiss it. Right? Wouldn't you agree? When you're thinking about these news stories, you don't draw a conclusion based on two stories. You sit with things, I imagine, for weeks at a time, watch them unfold, evaluate aspects, be interested in not so much drawing a conclusion, but being curious about how all the pieces fit together, how that logic works. To me, that's what's missing in a lot of critical thinking. We're really moving to verdicts far too quickly.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And like the highest goal is making a judgment about something.
Yes. Right.
Yes. The highest goal is yes or no, bad or good, evil versus, whatever. The idea that we must arrive at a judgment, and we must arrive at a judgment very quickly, is actually not the highest good in many cases, especially if our goal is to build critical thinking skills.
Right.
Nobody arrives out of their mother's womb a critical thinker. This is a skill that one has to practice over time. And the only way to develop any skill is practicing it.
That's right.
So the idea that you memorize a list of facts about why the other side is wrong about, fill in the blank topic, that's indoctrination. That's not critical thinking. And that can feel really uncomfortable for some people. Some people's brains really dislike the distress tolerance that is required with being presented with information they disagree with. Like it actually feels very distressing in their brains and body.
Yes.
And some people are better at tolerating the distress of being confronted with information they might disagree with. But regardless, distress tolerance is a skill you can practice. You can come to understand that it actually is okay for me to feel uncomfortable about this for a little while.
I got a really nice compliment this week. Someone read the introduction to my book and she said it made her cry. I don't set out to make people cry. That's not the goal of my writing. But the introduction to my new book, Help My Kid Hates Writing, really makes the case for why traditional writing education is failing our kids. Our kids want to be known, heard, seen, and valued for the thoughts they have, the ideas that cross their mind, their insights, their senses of humor, and we spend all our time evaluating them rather than reading them. Here's what another mom said. It's so lovely to read about you advocating for kids in writing. You've really extended your heart out to them, and this offers me, as the parent, such a life-giving perspective for them and for me. You're a voice to the voiceless, or at least a louder roar above what these kids are trying to communicate. It's awesome. I know so many kids and parents will thrive differently because of your work. You know, this is really the heart of everything we do in Brave Writer. I always say that kids are at the center of my pedagogy. We can learn everything we need to know about teaching if we pay attention to what they're telling us and to how they tell it to us. So if you need help with any of that, I highly recommend Help My Kid Hates Writing. And if you're looking for that philosophy sort of writ large for homeschool, my best-selling book, The Brave Learner, is still the bedrock of everything I believe about learning and education. You can learn about both of those by going to my author website, juliebogartwriter.com. We'll stick all of that in the show notes. Thanks for joining me today, and I can't wait to hear how your kids bloom when you give them the freedom to be the kind of writers they want to be.
I love this framing of practicing thinking about something. Like that is an element of life that is very difficult to maintain in an environment where everything is happening so fast all the time. And as you were speaking before, I was thinking about all the emotion words that were coming into the conversation. Discomfort, right? Overwhelm. And discomfort is pain. So I really like this framing that you're giving parents as a concrete tool to like space, like you said, Julie, time to sit and think, but practice, thinking of it as a skill that takes practice, just like playing the piano or learning a foreign language.
In fact, in my book, Raising Critical Thinkers, I define tolerance as the ability to tolerate your own discomfort. We're not trying to tolerate somebody else that we don't agree with. We're tolerating our discomfort with the fact that we don't agree with them. And the more that you learn to practice that and you look for the interior logic of the other position that you don't hold so that you're getting behind their eyes, you actually start to see what they value. One of the questions I like to ask people I don't agree with is, what is the beautiful outcome of your vision based on that belief? Because now you're putting them in their best optimistic language. They're able to say to you, well, you know, if you adopted my viewpoint about free speech, this is how we'd all be better. And you start to understand why they hold this view that you before thought was really crazy. Now, you still may not agree with it, but it helps you tolerate it better. It helps you live in the land of relationship instead of this constant cutting off. I'm wondering if you could even address that a little bit. There seems to be so many family relationships that are broken over this inability to tolerate the discomfort of disagreement. Do you see that rising? And what do you think the best antidote is to that in families?
Yeah, it actually is kind of heartbreaking.
It's so heartbreaking.
I hear from people how heartbroken they are about it. So it's not just my perception that it's heartbreaking. It's that people are legitimately heartbroken, that I don't even feel like I can go to Easter dinner at my grandma's house because I know that it's just going to devolve into chaos. And I don't want that. I want to have, warm, happy family memories in which, I'm not arguing with Uncle Todd about everything. So it legitimately can be very heartbreaking for people. And, I do think it's a great family holidays are kind of, we'll put that in a separate category, right? Like we can talk about family holidays another day, but if we're talking about like interpersonal relationships, we have to ask ourselves, first of all, what do I want from this relationship? Do I want to be close to this person? Sometimes we just feel like, no, you know what? I like Uncle Todd, but I don't need to see him every weekend. We can just coexist on Easter Sunday. That's totally fine with me. So the first thing is just asking yourself, what is it that I want from this relationship? Well, let's say it's your parents and you deeply care about them and you want to be close to them. And yet you find that this schism that has arisen in your political lives or, religious lives or whatever it is, feels like something that cannot be navigated. Like I don't know how to move forward from here. I think there's a few things that we have to remember. The first is that from a human society standpoint of how human society has evolved over the millennia, it actually is relatively new that we're even able to have these conversations. So it does feel uncomfortable. You would just get kicked out of the group if you in the past. You know what I mean? You would just get kicked out of the group of like, bad ideas, dangerous, get out. When people were very, very interdependent on one another, lived in tribal communities, etc. Somebody with wackadoodle ideas would not just be folded in. They would be like, you can't do that here. So the first thing is, I think, to remember, like, give yourself some grace of like, this actually is hard. Humans actually are not that good at this. Animal societies certainly don't tolerate outliers.
No.
If you're in a wolf pack and you are dangerous to the rest of us, get out. Right? So I'm not saying that's how we should be. I'm just saying like higher order mammals are not super good at tolerating outliers.
Okay.
Historically speaking. So it is weird and it feels weird in your brain. And that's okay for it to feel weird. So you're not doing it wrong. It's not like 1,000 years ago, everybody had different opinions and we all got along great. False. You just get kicked out. You sent down the river. Okay. Get in the boat. Goodbye. I'm being metaphorical, but you know what I'm saying. The second thing is, when Western society began to evolve to the point where we started tolerating dissent. For a long time, authoritarians were just in power in government. We lived in theocracies. We lived in, under authoritarian monarchical regimes.
Right.
Where dissent was not tolerated.
Nope.
And so we didn't learn how to dissent interpersonally. That was also not a skill that was taught and learned. So it actually has only been a couple hundred years of human civilization in which dissent has been openly tolerated. Now, yes, you can think back to like Greek philosophers, et cetera, but I'm talking about like from a societal standpoint. Dissent is a relatively new idea. So give yourself a little grace of like, this is supposed to be hard because it's not that easy for higher order mammals to tolerate weirdos.
No, this is a perfect segue because in this moment, I love that you said that about dissent, because I always say that one of the ways you can define a cult atmosphere is its ability to not tolerate dissent, right? So when you're in these insulated communities that don't allow you to ask questions or challenge the rules, that's when we start to get into a little bit culty behavior. So the question that is really prominent right now is, what is fascism? What is totalitarianism? I was listening to a podcast the other day and it kind of chilled me. I was trying to go outside of my normal bandwidth, and this person was saying that they really miss the days when dissent was quashed, that they want to go to a time before voting, that we really did need to trust landowners and heads of household and not women. They certainly didn't want women voting.
Yikes.
But I was listening to this and he would never call that fascism. Right. And yet for me, I was like, this feels very uncomfortable. And they said the Enlightenment was the worst thing to happen to Western civilization. Yeah. So can we talk about this for a moment? Because this is somebody who's listened to, right? Like this isn't a complete unknown wackadoo. So please let me know your thoughts. It's been bothering me, Sharon. We need a Sharon rescue.
I miss the days when women weren't voting. Oh, no. Oh, no. Here we go. Here we go. I mean, okay. So that's a great example of what the kind of things you have to tolerate when you want to live in a free society, right? That you have to tolerate people with bad ideas.
Yeah.
And that feels really wrong. And it especially feels, it's not just Uncle Todd at the family gathering. It's what becomes scary about it, because there have always been weird people, right? With bad ideas. That's not new. But what becomes scary about it is when we start platforming people with bad ideas, and people start listening to them, and they start having followings, and those ideas take root and grow, and they spread into political movements, and they spread into political violence, and like all of these things. That's where it starts to become concerning. Because it grows beyond them. It grows beyond the one person who lives with their mom's bad ideas, right? So fascism is something that is almost like a term that just gets bandied about, like the political left is like, the rise of fascism in America is correlated to Donald Trump. And the political right is like, Joe Biden was the most fascist leader we've ever had. And each side believes the other is a fascist. And I was reading some comments earlier today where people were like, well, I finally feel a sense of freedom today after living under fascist sleepy Joe Biden for the last 4 years. And a lot of people on the left are like, do you not see everything that is going on? Like, what is happening? Like, this is not, we're taking chainsaw out of the government. Like, that's not cool. So both sides like to use the term fascist. Of course, fascism is associated with right-wing authoritarianism. That is, whereas communism is associated with left-wing authoritarianism. At some point, these two ends of the horseshoe get real close together, right? Fascism and communism get real close together. Like, tell me what the difference is between Stalin and Hitler.
I mean,
right? Like, there are a few different ideologies. Hitler didn't believe that Germany should own all the means of production. Like, there were still some private companies that served the Nazi party in Germany, whereas Stalin was like, we own everything, including all the farms, etc. So there are some on the ground differences between these things, but if the net effect is not that different. You end up with millions of people dead.
Right.
That's the net effect. Millions of people dead and an extreme clampdown on personal liberties and civil rights. Either way, we can sit and argue about like, oh, well, this is left wing, that's right wing. Ultimately, neither of them are places we want to go.
Right.
That's the bottom line. Either way, neither of those ideologies have ever led anywhere that humans are happy to have ended up. Right. So that's one thing that I would say. In terms of like hallmarks of fascism, it's actually less. When Hitler rose to power, he was democratically elected. He rose to power, and it only took a few years for the country to devolve into fascism. It's usually a relatively quick process over the course of a short period of time. It's not an on-off light switch, but it is a relatively quick progression. Most countries who have become fascist do not degrade over a period of hundreds of years. It's usually a precipitating event in the case of Nazi Germany. And again, I'm not saying America's Nazi Germany. Do not write to Julie and Melissa and be like, Sharon said it's Nazi Germany. I'm not saying they're the same. I'm just using this as an example of a fascist regime. You have a precipitating event like the worldwide, like the global economic crisis,
right?
That was in the 1930s, and somebody who claims to have an answer to all of society's ills, and many people were feeling so much angst and fear over what was happening that the solution seemed better than living with the problem.
Yes.
And also there's an inability to predict the future. Like most Germans who voted for Hitler probably were not able to prognosticate that this is going to end with a complete and total destruction of Western Europe.
Right.
Like that was not the end that they had in mind.
No.
But nevertheless, therein lies the danger of even giving tiny amount, like even giving a pinky toe in the door of fascist thinking, is that it might seem like, oh, it's just a small thing, it's no big deal. But those incremental gains grow rapidly. And that is why democracy is the worst form of government, but it's the best that we've ever come up with.
And
right?
I love that quote. And I'm wondering then about the role of protest in these moments. Does it accelerate the push toward, that more tyrannical control, or does it actually have an effective impact in mitigating? And are we dealing with any of this right now? I mean, are you free to even make that comment? I know sometimes I'm following Moshe, right? And he has his 1 to 10 scale on where we are in terms of safety of the democracy. I think he's at a 3. I think people are genuinely curious and they're trying to figure it out, and they're trying to understand, is this the Underground Railroad moment? Should I be doing something? Should I be taking action? Or are we overreacting because we're just consuming one kind of media? How do you see all of this?
Yeah, what a complicated moment in history this is. It really is. It's a very complicated moment in history. And so if it feels complicated to you, you would not be alone. That would be an accurate assessment that it's complicated. Throughout history, protest movements have often accelerated change in a country. Sometimes they do result in, a violent quashing of said protest movement. I'm thinking about Tiananmen Square in China.
Even Selma, right?
Yeah. Yep. Sometimes they do result in a retribution type action from the government. But often those protest movements ultimately do lead. They act as an accelerant of a fire that has already had the kindling inserted into it. So it's not that they are building the discontent with their protest. It's that they are helping this already dry kindling light more quickly. So historically, protests have done a lot, especially in the case of the civil rights movement, and especially organized protests. This is something that I have talked about frequently when people are like, I want to make a difference, whatever it is. I often encourage people to join an organization that aligns with them ideologically, that works towards the goal of whatever it is that they want to see. Gun control or free speech rights or whatever it is, that the power is in numbers. One dude on a street corner with a sign is Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, right? But 100,000 people, it's really difficult to discredit that number of people.
Yes.
So organized protest is more effective than just you being a sign holder alone.
Yeah.
So joining an organization that does what it is that you think is important historically has been very effective. In terms of where we are in a democracy scale, I don't know what the scale that other people are using is, so I can't evaluate,
Right.
The scale is, here's the rubric and here's how, so I don't know what the rubric is, but I will say that some of the things that are most concerning to me in this political moment, number one is a degradation of the validity of courts. That is historically unprecedented in the United States. We have hundreds of years of a legal precedent of 3 co-equal branches of government, that each one is intended to check and balance the powers of the other. That is how it was designed. Power is shared amongst the branches in an effort to keep one person from becoming too powerful. So when I hear widespread concerted attacks on the court system, that is concerning to me, along with a propensity to ignore court orders That is also concerning to me. That is a degradation in the rule of law. Courts do not have an enforcement police.
Right. That's what I wondered. I saw someone say, I had no idea the United States was built on the honor system. And
Yes,
I thought that was
legitimately it is.
unbelievable. It's amazing,
Yes.
really. Yes.
Yes, legitimately it is. That's the concept of the rule of law. That we are a nation of laws and not a nation of men. We do not follow men. We follow the law.
Wow.
And that is a bedrock principle in America, is the rule of law. And yes, it means that when a president is ordered to do something by a court, they comply even when they disagree.
Right.
Because they believe in the rule of law. And in fact, it's so remarkable when somebody refuses, that if you ask any legal scholar, when was a time that a U.S. president refused to abide by an order of the Supreme Court, they will all give you one example, and it is Andrew Jackson.
Your least favorite president.
My least favorite president. It's Andrew Jackson.
Yes.
And he said something to the effect of, like, if that's what they want, then come down here and enforce it themselves.
Right.
That is how rare it is.
Wow.
For a president to ignore court orders. Okay. So this is not partisan. This is everybody from, Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, Joe Biden, even Richard Nixon.
Right. True.
Was committing crimes
Yes.
that he should not have been committing, was abiding by the rule of law.
Yeah.
No, when it came to court orders, I'm not saying he followed out all the laws, but nevertheless, this is not a partisan concept. This is a bedrock American concept that we follow court orders. So that's concerning to me. And the other thing that is concerning to me, and I think most Americans feel concerned about, like polling data supports this, that there are a bunch of 19-year-old hackers who are just stealing all of our government's private information,
right,
and doing who knows what with it without any kind of oversight, because we have gotten rid of all of the oversight of it. That is, imagine a scenario in which Hillary Clinton got elected instead of Donald Trump in 2016. And Hillary Clinton hires a bunch of 19-year-olds who have very racist tweets in their past, very problematic tweets, hires a bunch of 19-year-olds and says, go steal all the data of every American, and then we'll put it in an insecure facility, and no one will know what I'm going to do with it.
Oh, my gosh.
Imagine Hillary Clinton doing that. That is like, she would be massacred in the press.
Yes.
Right? Like we're still talking about Hillary's emails all of these years later. Right? So if it seems unthinkable for a Democrat to do it, the same standard should apply to Republicans and vice versa.
That's right.
This, again, is not a partisan issue.
Right.
Everyone should follow the rules. And right now, some people are not. It actually is hypocritical and partisan to not point out when somebody is not following the rules. If I were to say, you know what? I agree with their ideological objectives that we should save the government money, so I'm going to look the other way when they're not following the rules. That actually is a more hypocritical position than pointing out the wrongdoing of any party who is not following the rules.
When you said that about court orders, I'm divorced. And I remember that I went to my lawyer and there was, the natural wrangling over money at the end. And so I had come up with this way of accounting for the money that was actually not the way the court ordered it. But I thought it was logical and it made perfect sense. And I thought it matched what we had agreed to in a conversation. So I came to my lawyer and I mentioned it, and he looked at me and he says, you may never disobey a court order for any reason. Doesn't matter how logical it is to you. Doesn't matter what advice you got from your friends. This is the law. And that really chilled me at the time, because I think we mistake our logic for the law. The law doesn't care about our logic. We've all watched Legally Blonde. We've learned this, but we don't remember it, right? It is irrespective
Like it's hard.
Exactly. With your blonde hair, you look just like Elle right now. But honestly, it's really important to remember that the law is different than our political aspirations, persuasions, our own internal logic, the way that we assemble facts to tell a story. The law doesn't do that. It doesn't care about that. So help us figure out how to retain our optimism when things are a little bit, in flux, and we don't feel confident about whether or not we're in a safe political moment. And then how do we retain our humility when the tide is in our favor? So optimism when it's going against us, and humility when we think, oh, well, we got to win. There tends to be a lot of gotcha business going on, right?
Yeah, I think so. The first thing I would say is that the power that is wielded in your favor can also be used against you. So Beautiful. Be careful what you wish for. Careful what you wish for. So that's the first thing. That the second thing is politics cannot be a zero-sum game, which I think too often people view it as. It's a zero-sum game. In order for me to win, you have to lose. When in reality, government is meant to exist for the common good. And that doesn't mean we're all going to agree on everything it does, and we all agree on the amount of the top marginal tax rate and blah, blah, blah. That's the nature of human society. But the idea that I have to destroy you in order to better myself, that is not how government is supposed to work. And that's not how anything meaningful has ever been achieved in government, is the idea that I have to destroy you in order to better myself. So we have to abandon the idea that this has to be a zero-sum game, or even should be a zero-sum game, because it's not meant to. And the third thing I would say is that most of the people that I admire from history, their external circumstances were not ones that I would wish to replicate in my own life. I think back to the Harriet Tubmans of the world, especially I just keep coming back to her for whatever reason. She's just she's been lurking in the cobwebs of my mind lately. Here is a woman that most people know her name. They know that she was part of the Underground Railroad. But they, couldn't really tell you too much about her other than she worked on the Underground Railroad. But Harriet Tubman, zero of her life circumstances were things that you would trade your life for. She's a woman who is enslaved, and when she escapes enslavement, her family remains enslaved. She was a disabled American who suffered from a traumatic brain injury as a child. And then the rest of her life had a type of, what we would call today, a type of epilepsy, but they didn't have that kind of language or diagnostic tools. And so she just had fits and spells throughout her entire life. She was illiterate and didn't have the tools to be able to access literacy. So she couldn't read a map, for example, or read the directions on a piece of paper. And let me tell you what Harriet Tubman did not spend her days doing. Wringing her hands about who was in the White House. Wow. Harriet Tubman did not say, well, I guess the Democrats are in control of Congress again, so I'm just going to stay home and cry. What Harriet Tubman did was what she could, where she was, with the resources available to her. And she ended up rescuing 60 to 70 people from enslavement. During the Civil War, she saved around 500 people during an event at the Civil War. Did Harriet Tubman end legal enslavement in the United States? No. Did she fix white supremacy? No. Did she create a system of reparations where people who were enslaved got, any kind of payment for the labor that they had been doing their entire lives? No. She did not fix many of her external circumstances. She does later, as a free woman, buy a house with the help of somebody else. And she does go on to have, a good life. But we don't look back on Harriet Tubman for having had a good life. We don't look
Right.
back on her for the house that she was able to buy. We look back on her for what she did despite her external circumstances. And so if we are going to sit around and wait for our external circumstances to align before we choose to act with hope, then we are going to sit around and keep on waiting. Because the people I admire from history continue to do the next needed thing despite the enormity of their external circumstances, despite that millions of Americans were enslaved, millions of Americans were in bondage. It did not, the fact that she could only rescue 60 to 70 people, we don't know the exact number because she was illiterate and couldn't keep accurate records. And people that knew her wrote down different things. But despite the fact that she couldn't fix everything, it did not stop her from fixing what she could. And nobody would look back at Harriet Tubman now and be like, what a waste. She didn't fix it all, so forget it. No, we would look back on her now and call her an American hero.
Gosh.
Because she did what she could where she was with the resources available to her. So I would encourage people to stop thinking that their external circumstances are limiting who they can become. Their external circumstances are limiting who they can impact or what they can do. Because the people we most admire from history today overcame incredible external circumstances that most often they had very little control over. In the same way that you might be feeling like, I don't have any control over these 19-year-old hackers. What am I supposed to do about that? Am I supposed to call my congressperson? Well, I tried that. That didn't do anything. We feel an incredible sense of frustration about our inability to control our external circumstances, when in reality, history admires the doers and not the critics, the people who actually keep just putting one foot in front of the other despite their external circumstances. And the good news is that that's available to every single one of us here and now today, no matter what happens in the news tomorrow.
That's my favorite thing about your message. And you actually walk your talk. You have raised millions of dollars. You've organized so many people to give blood at a blood bank. Like, it isn't just about the money. You have found ways to forgive medical debt. Something that really stuck with me today as we're recording, Pope Francis died, and he was such an advocate for the marginalized, just the way that he chose not to wear the elegant robes, but to be a man of the people and to go into the ghettos and barrios and to really embrace those who are at the lowest. I did grad school at Xavier University, which is a Jesuit school. And one of my professors who had met many of the popes, he said something that I've never forgotten. He said, "We work for a justice we will never live to see." And I thought about Pope Francis dying today, that all he did was move the ball a little further down the field, right? And so we may never see the results of the thing we're working for, right? Like, there are a lot of people my age who are, and a little older, who are like, we already marched in the 70s. It's like, and I remember saying to one of my kids, I'm sorry that you have to march. And he's a human rights lawyer. And he says, Mom, every generation has to march. That never stops. There's always a cause that will outlive you. But that doesn't mean you don't participate in this moment of history to help move that ball down the field. What an incredible example. Yeah. Oh, good. Yeah.
Well, and the work is actually important to the development of humans. If the idea can never be like, well, we didn't make it perfect, so let's all give up. Is that what we're saying?
Horrible.
Let's all give up because we didn't make it perfect. Humans are, all humans have experienced suffering and tragedy. If you haven't yet, you're going to.
Right.
And that is part of human development. That's part of what it means to be human.
Yes.
So the idea that some generation in the future is going to have made human society perfect, that's a fallacy. That doesn't mean we get to stop our important work. Doing the work, marching or protesting or advocating or whatever it is that you are doing, actually is part of your development as a human. And so the idea that some future generation is going to be robbed of that aspect of their development, that's not a future that I would ascribe to. Humans must learn to live with and overcome adversity. They must learn to live with and overcome suffering. That is part of how we become kind, empathetic people, and
Absolutely.
not psychopaths who think everything is about ourselves. So I think it helps me to remember that the work is not meant to be done because the work itself is important.
Wow.
It's really powerful.
Yeah. Tearing up over here. Sharon, having you on this show was so meaningful. And I know that our listeners in particular will be so grateful to hear everything you had to say. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. It's such a delight to talk to both of you. Thank you for having me.
Okay, that's another Brave Writer episode in the books. Thanks for joining Melissa and me today. We love it when you leave us reviews, when you send us comments via text message. We read them all. We also couldn't do this show without our fabulous production team at Nova or Jeanette Hall, the Brave Writer team member who handles all those administrative details you know nothing about. In the meantime, we hope that you have a fantastic week. Keep going, think well. We're rooting for you.